望大家非常享受。
Welcome back. We hope that you enjoyed the refreshment we have prepared for you. Now let's move on to the last but also very exciting discussion sessions afterward. It will be followed by the gala party. But before that, we still have one very important topic to jointly discover, that is digital transformation and sustainable development. I'm not sure whether you still remember back to 2021 when the world was still in the grip of COVID. The global supply chain have been severely impacted, in particular in some major ports in the U.S. Huge humps of containers have been piped up in the ports, and the ships cannot enter the port, and what they can do is just change the route. So in our discussion, we will have Bertrand, Chen, CEO of Global Shipping Business Network, to the stage to talk about digital transformation and sustainable development for the shipping industry. Welcome, Bertrand. Welcome to our East Tech West, which has talked about the chaos in shipping industry, in particular during the COVID. So what is the biggest challenge from your perspective for the shipping industry? Okay, it's my honor to brief over my industry.
The rates are back to very low. So during the coronavirus crisis, rate went super high, right? Some people were saying actually move a box, it costs more than 15,000 USD to move a box. Now rates are much lower. So the shipping line are not making as much money. Also, they need to digitize. They need to transform digital transformation and get rid of paper. So this, I think, still remains the main challenge, how to digitize.
Okay, so when you say rates, means like 价格，是吗？
The freight rates.
对，那我知道你们是在试图用区。
Yes, I know that you are using the blockchain trying to tackle some challenges confronted by you. So if that's the case, how have you adopted the blockchain technology to tackle the challenges?
It's a consortium formed from some of the largest shipping line and terminal operator. We have some shareholders in China, Cusco Shipping Line. We have some shareholder in Germany, Hapag-Lloyd. We have some very large terminal operator in Shanghai, in Singapore, in Hong Kong. And the idea is we want to allow people to exchange data using blockchain technology to make sure the data is safely transmitted. And also, once people receive the data, they know they can trust the data because it hasn't been changed. So that's a real use case using blockchain.
Yeah, but like 你刚才说的非常好，就是说
I believe you have give us a very great idea. Talked about the blockchain's adoption in particular for the data sharing. So how China can use it.
Europe 或者美国在
So compared with Europe, China is much bigger a market. So could you please address on the development of blockchain here in China?
Blockchain is really still very popular in China. I think a lot of enterprise use blockchain for the sake of blockchain. In Europe and US, I think blockchain is now more synonym with scams and crypto speculation. So I think in the shipping industry, one of the best use case for blockchain today is electronic bill of lading. So electronic bill of lading is a digitize of a paper document, which is critical in global trade. So this is a document that allows you to get the box, the container from the terminal. And used to be relying on paper. During the COVID-19 crisis, you don't have this piece of paper, you cannot collect. And I think a lot of the country realized actually you need to digitize that. And what's happening this year is you have the UK government changed their law to recognize electronic bill of lading. And you have a lot of electronic bill of lading using blockchain that's popping up. And China right now, a lot of exporter and consignee in China will use blockchain enable electronic bill of lading. So Cusco Shipping Line, for instance, one of my member and shareholders, a lot of the volume of the BL now is becoming electronic relying on blockchain. So that's a real use case. And I think now more and more other shipping line will adopt such technology as well.
对，然后我注意到啊，最近中国非常的
Also noticed that China have given great support to development and adoption of blockchain, in particular in Hong Kong SAR. So from your perspective, in which area you believe will be the hotline for the blockchain adoption and development? So, for example, US, Europe, mainland China, and Hong Kong, SAR, and Singapore, which of them will be the highland or heartland for the adoption and development of blockchain?
I think we can talk about blockchain first, or Web3, and then we can talk about the use case specific to the shipping industry. So from Web3 perspective, I think after the 2022, 2021 craziness, I think a lot of the country pulled back the regulation. So in Asia specifically, I think Hong Kong and Singapore now have slightly different stance, I would say. Singapore is more proponent for the financial industry, for the banks to use blockchain to facilitate settlement. Hong Kong is more native Web3, closer to, I think, what public blockchain was for the beginning. And the rest of the world, I think the only place where there's still significant development for blockchain is probably in Dubai, in Middle East. Now, how the blockchain will impact the shipping industry, I think there's probably two main use cases. One is the bill of lading that I just talked about. So if this EBL is becoming blockchain enabled, you can tokenize it and then link that to Web3 use case for finance effectively. So you can imagine someone do global trade, they move the container is in the ship, is tracked in the EBL, and the financial flow payment doesn't go to the traditional rail of SWIFT or traditional payment. They can go using blockchain. So that's one very big use case. Another one could be anything that has to do with sustainability. So the industry, the shipping industry right now is becoming to be more decarbonized, right? Decarbonization of the shipping industry is a very big theme. And you can look at the IMO, International Maritime Organization, pronouncement that they want to dedicate more decarbonization of the shipping industry. However, what that means is you need to be able to ascertain and prove to your customer that indeed the shipment is decarbonized. So an example, if let's say you are IKEA or Amazon and you say, I'm gonna pay twice the price or 3 times the price to make sure the ship where my goods are carried are actually a good ship, meaning it's efficient or it burns very good fuel. To prove that today, there's no way you can prove it, and people can trust, right? It's literally you trust the shipping line. Now, it's because of the reputation of the shipping line. If you like the shipping line, you think they're not lying to you, maybe. But there's a higher risk of greenwashing. And not even the shipping line lying. They just don't necessarily have the data. And we think blockchain is actually a really, really good use case for that, to enable this entire industry to decarbonize. And I think there's a lot of demand for it right now.
Well said. 那回到这个可持续发展 sustainability.
When we talk about sustainability, yesterday night we also talked about this topic. I think it's a very interesting topic from the national perspective, be it in European Union or in some other areas. We have the national level regulations for the ESG and for shipping company. That means higher price. So my question is, how high the price can be, and what a high cost or what an extra cost will you have to pay for that? Will you transfer the extra cost to the consumer and result in the higher price for the shipping service?
It will cost money. There will be inflationary impact coming from decarbonized shipping, right? It has to. There's no question of it. Now, the question, the one question that remains is who's gonna drive this? So in, let's say, Europe, I think some of the customers say, I want to buy something that's sourced from some principle that doesn't create greenhouse gas. Some consumer willing to pay. It's actually hard to know how much they will to pay. And also the main reason they don't know how much to pay is you don't know, even if you pay the extra, all the real action be taken. There's a high risk of greenwashing. So what we see right now in Europe, European Union, is there is regulation that's coming in force starting next year. There's something called EU ETS, whereby all the ships that will go to Europe, they will measure 50% of the carbon emission footprint. And that will translate into a tax. Effectively, it's a carbon tax. So what that means is the government, EU government, is imposing this cost to the shipping line. So you can have debate, is the tax the right thing or not? But now what that means is the shipping line has to take action to decarbonize. And naturally, that will impact other consumers. So I think it's just a trade-off that people will have to live with. My point of view is I think this is a natural action that will lead to some interesting effects. I think the main effect is suddenly you need to be able to prove that indeed you're taking the right action. And you can see in the shipping line industry, some people are taking a lot of action. Some shipping line, I won't name names, who are investing in the methanol ship, who are setting up investment fund to go buy those resources, right? Because especially it's going to be really hard to buy the alternative fuel. And some are more passive are waiting to see. It's obvious that everyone will have to become decarbonized. It's a question of time. And then in that world, what you need is to be able to prove to the end consumer that indeed the action you're taking is right. And that's something that's not easy to prove today.
Yeah, that's very good point. Indeed, actually. 你觉得区块链
So for you, for blockchain, would it be more a solution, like a solution in this kind of landscape?
I think blockchain has always been thought of a use case for sustainability. So if you look at 2017, 2018, when you had the two previous wave of crypto speculation, there were a lot of sustainability coin that was launched. My personal view is blockchain is not enough, but it's necessary. What I mean by that is fundamentally you need to have trusted some entity to go and verify. Today, there are companies whose job is to check on the carbon footprint, carbon emission of a ship. However, they are typically not the one talking to the end consumer. They're not talking to the IKEA, the Amazon, the customer of IKEA, customer of Amazon. So blockchain is a way to link all this data from those people you trust that verify this. And they verify that, by the way, for the government, for European government, right? There are only few who can do that. To link this data to the end consumer's data. And then if you get through blockchain, I think it's a much better solution than anything we've seen in the past.
Very interesting point, but unfortunately we're running out of time. Thank you so much, Bertrand, for your time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
谢谢 That's why. 非常感谢。那么好。
Thank you very much. Next, we are going to talk about agriculture. In terms of agricultural technology, we have seen very good developments, which has changed the efficiency of agriculture. Meanwhile, the global population is rising and we have more challenges ahead. According to the data of World Bank, by 2050, we need to enhance 70% of our food output so that we can raise a big population, which is around 9 billion. So how can agricultural development go hand in hand with our ESG? I would like to invite the next moderator on this stage. That is Wendy Ye, and she is accompanied by Justin Kong from XKG. Thank you. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to come here to meet Justin right here in Nansha. Years ago, I also had an interview with him concerning XKG, and we got that interview during COVID, so we have to do it online. So today I'm very happy to meet him offline. And we're going to talk about how agriculture can secure our food supply. And I believe that your company, XKG, has made great contribution in this regard. And now we are back to our normal life after COVID, and we also have other challenges such as climate change and the rising global population. And we need to offer more food to the whole world. So in your perspective, how can technology of agriculture can help us to have sustainable growth? Thank you very much, Wendy. I'm also very excited to meet you. In fact, I did not join this kind of meeting quite frequently in the past. And now I think I make a right choice and meet so many new friends. I agree that the global population is rising. I remember when I studied abroad, the global population is just like 6 billion. And when I'm back from foreign country to China, the global population is around 7 billion. Now you can see it's going to reach 9 billion. So the population is rising too fast. So we need to find more solution to raise such a big population by offering them enough food. For example, we can use technology and robots, and we also need to find solution to climate change. So in a nutshell, how can we make good use of these new technologies to secure our food supply? I'm happy that you mentioned climate change, which is a very key topic for our discussion. You know, I live in Silicon Valley in California, and every summer you can see a lot of fire on those mountains, and that can bring huge loss to the farmers. And also here in China, we see several floods and other natural disasters, which also bring great losses to the farmers and the agricultural industry in general. So are there any updated technology to solve these problems? How can we cope with this kind of extreme weather? How can we make sure there is resiliency of agriculture? Okay, in agriculture, there are different kind of way to make our production, but most of them are based on our experience and also by the nature. So totally, agriculture is very vulnerable, and the farmers is the most vulnerable in the whole part of agriculture because they do not have enough resources to deal with the climate change and the loss of capital. So in the past several years, in the past 1 decade, when I worked in the agricultural technology sector, I saw that whenever we had got natural disasters like mountain fire, flood, or earthquakes, the farmers had no solution to cope with all those disasters. Their resiliency is very low. So now we need to find more solution. We can use data analysis. We can try to avoid some risks so that we can have a better timing to put the seedling. In the past, we may only observe the weather, and now we can learn from the data. We can see when we should do what. We could not have this kind of scientific solution in the past, but now we can, and we can do it very quickly. For example, in the past, the farmers need to see when they get the harvest. If they get the harvest too early, they may not have enough output. If they get the harvest too late, it may be raining so heavily that they could not harvest at all. So we need to find the right time, and we need to make these judgments by science. And we also see there is a change of our demographic population. We see that on average, the Chinese farmers could be like 50 years old. We don't have many younger farmers because they don't want to work so hard. So we need to find a way. We need to equip our younger farmers with some technologies, equipment, and etc. So those are the 3 factors we can help agriculture to have sustainable development. I see. Just now before we came onto the stage, you told me you were back from Rome. I see, from Rome. You attended a conference called Sustainable Development of Agriculture and Robot Science. And that was the first time for such a kind of international conference to be held. And we also know that many government leaders pay attention to agriculture. And yesterday, I also read an article. It's about an interview between a high official of the agricultural department in China with a scientist. And there are a lot of key issues for Chinese farmers because we have a lot of, let's call them peasants. They do not have a big farm. They just have a very small lot of field to grow their plants. So we call them peasants. So in such kind of Chinese context, how can we differentiate ourselves from the farmers in USA? Because in USA, the farmers have a big land, but in China, we have very small lots of land. So in your company, how can you serve the Chinese peasants in a professional way? How can you differentiate the Chinese peasants from other kinds of farmers? Because you need to have a lot of costs of R&D, so how can you strike a balance? Yes, you're right. In China, the peasants need to have very good efficiency. And we have different kind of peasants. We have some family peasants. They run the field by the entire family. And in USA, they have a big farm, thousands of acres of those farmland. they need to buy some big machine. They also need to get loans from the banks to invest on those big machines, and they can pay back the loans by their harvests from year to year. So that is different, because the Chinese peasants could not get a lot of financial support from the banks or other financial institutions. They may just observe and get their personal experience. They will see what agricultural products are sold well, and then they will follow suit. And then they will try to use different way to plant different products. But now we can have the drones. We can have a lot of smaller gadgets on the field. They can be very helpful for the Chinese peasants. And in USA, most of those machines are quite huge. But in China, our gadgets are smaller. They may focus on some detailed skills of planting. So that is another difference. Moreover, China is proud of the agricultural infrastructure. Every year, before COVID, I visited many countries in the whole world, and I kept telling people that in China, we have great infrastructure for agriculture, and we can actually cut the costs. You don't have to buy a lot of high-tech gadgets. You simply use some chips, and you can transmit your data through the cloud, and then you can get a lot of judgment. Moreover, the penetration rate is quite stable. We buy the agricultural gadgets very constantly, and it's a big investment for the Chinese peasants. They will they always have a wait and see attitude. They will see that if their neighbors buy a gadget and that gadget works very well, they will keep buying the same gadgets. So that's the way for the Chinese peasants to have investment. I see. And for your company, XKG, your company was established in 2007. I would like to confirm a piece of information with you. It is said that you have got a new round of financing, and you try to got your IPO in China in 2019, but you withdraw your IPO application. And now you got another round of financing. So do you have any new plan for the future? Will you get IPO again? Any updates? Well, yes, you're right. It was last year that we decided not to apply for IPO. It's a big decision, isn't it? It's a very complicated decision to make. It depends on the market. And the reason why we make that decision is not only about COVID, it's about the market. We need to compare the results if we have IPO or without IPO. We find it very difficult to visit the stocks markets in Shanghai. We have to stop that investment, that project. Our investors are okay with our IPO withdrawal decision because time is not right. So we will wait for another moment. And we have, and moreover, our investors have a very long perspective for the future development of our product. They are not asking for short-term return. So will you go back for another round of IPO? Yes, we will try, because we believe that we can get more energy from the capital markets if we get IPO. So far, we haven't got a lot of profits. We can make profits by selling some single drones, but now we have 6 product lines. Each of the product line has great investment, like billions of RMB. So the whole cycle of business is very long, and you can see we still survive till today. We have 16 years of history. I see. It is also very happy for me to see you here in this conference, and time is up. So I have to call an end to our panel discussion. I hope that in the future we can have more opportunity to talk about smart agriculture and the technology. Thank you very much.
感谢 Wendy 和 Justin 带来的精彩。
Special thanks goes to Wendy and Justin for your sharing. Last but not least is our last fireside discussion. In my panel discussion, we also talked a lot about the supply chain in the shipping industry, but for the supply chain as a whole, we see the growing challenge for the global supply chain, in particular for its resilience with the increasing amount of global transaction. While at the same time, you have to create more innovative solutions to ensure our ESG target to be delivered. So, we would like to give floor to Evelyn and her guest. Welcome to the stage to continue this topic.
Thanks for joining me today and our three guests. Wen Han, who is Chairman and CEO of Windrose, Mark Clayton, Group CFO of C2W Group, also Vice Chair of the British Chamber of Commerce in Guangdong, and also Tasos Zavitsanakis, Co-Head of Sustainable Finance Asia Pacific at UBS. So very diverse views on this supply chain topic. I mean, if you want to really bring it home, in 2021, I think a lot of us remember that high surging shipping costs were driving up prices, and the UN actually did a report that said, that rise in shipping costs meant that consumer prices would go up 1.5% the following year, specifically affecting consumer electronics and furniture. Here we don't necessarily have any representatives from shipping, but different parts of the supply chain. And maybe when you can kick this off by telling us a bit about what you're doing in this area of the supply chain and how much you're going to be lowering prices for us.
Wow, great. Thank you. It's great to be here. My name is Wen. I'm the founder of a company called Windrose Technology. We make real trucks that are purely electric. And that's important because, like you mentioned, globally in China and in the US, somewhere between 8 to 15% of all GDP goes to transportation, which means every 100 that we pay for anything, there's about 8 to 15% within that goes to using planes, ships, or trucks to move things around. And so within that, about 8% of Chinese economies using trucks. And in trucks, large-scale, heavy-duty trucks is the majority of cost. So what we do is we do two things. We electrify, so we replace the traditional diesel fuel with electricity. We also work on automating trucks. So that is about 2/3 of all the costs in trucking. So 1/3 goes to paying for the truckers, the labor, and then 1/3 goes to the fuel, which is today the diesel. So by electrifying, we can bring down the fuel cost by about 50%. So again, within 100%, 8% goes to trucking, about 3% is fuel, so we can bring that down by 1.5 percentage points. So 1.5% cheaper for everything. And labor, that's another about 1.5% to 3% that we can bring down. So that's our goal, to make everything a few percentage points cheaper with our technology.
So every percentage point counts here, but we're also concerned about carbon emissions. Maybe Mark, you can talk us through some of the things that you've been seeing on the entire supply chain. How are you working with companies?
So the one thing our company does is OEM manufacturing in China, and through that we have a supply chain of over 500 different Chinese vendors based around China. The first thing we've been trying to do is localize our supply chain. So get as many suppliers in Guangdong as we can, and then in Zhuhai as we can. Localization, A, helps to reduce its transportation costs, but B, it also helps on the emissions, as currently all of the trucks are diesel-powered. But one thing we're seeing on a larger macro scale globally is a consumer-driven desire for products which are not harmful to the environment. And this is not just talking about the materials used, but also talking about the emissions that are created whilst producing a certain product. The EU is bringing in the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which the trial period started on the 1st of October this year, so just a couple of weeks ago. And at the end of 2025, beginning 26, it will start. The carbon border adjustment mechanism means that industrial goods entering the EU have to calculate how much their greenhouse gas emissions are, and then they have to buy a carbon certificate to pay an additional tax to do the border adjustment mechanism. This is only industrial goods so far, but the way I see it and the way I have conversations with colleagues in the industry, this is going to basically start in industry but then go on to all products, including consumer products, including vehicles, including everything. And the EU Parliament has already started looking at 2030 for when it expands this to all products. They've not said this officially, but they're looking at 2030 for when they'll begin. What I want to do over the next year or 2 years, using expertise locally here in China and also trying to get international expertise in to help, using high tech and AI, is build a calculator that I will be able to put into my entire supply chain of over 500 Chinese factories that will calculate accurately what the greenhouse gas emissions are for each of their inputs, be it the raw materials, be it the electricity, how is that generated, how do they get the stamped metal sheets, etc., the PCBAs, whatever it is. I can then bring that through into a final assembled product in my factory and see what are the greenhouse gas emissions for this shoe, for that speaker. How much did that generate? The consumers want to know this. Once we have that figure in the calculator, we can work through the supply chain to reduce it by the type of electricity we're using, be it through renewables or through other sources which are more sustainable. And then we can find out what the final figure is and offset that, giving a net zero product to the consumers. As this is coming, and as there isn't really joined up thinking on this yet, it is going to raise consumer prices at the beginning. Unfortunately, the consumer currently is the loser for the net zero push. I do believe in the net zero push, don't get me wrong, I think it's a great thing, but the consumer is the loser until we all work together and countries work together to find the best route for this correctly. I'll finish there.
Right, well, it sounds like we're all going to have to pay for this bigger goal of climate, reducing carbon emissions, addressing some of the climate issues, and institutional money certainly plays a lot of role in that. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about the flows that you're seeing.
Yeah, no, I think all these are very relevant, by the way, right? I mean, because institutional money, first of all, and sustainability, there's been quite a lot of discussions in terms of, is it really happening, is it not? And what I can say is that sustainability is definitely the growth area. Institutional money are looking for pockets of green assets to invest, as well as brown assets that will need to be converted. And just to give a little bit of an indication, I mean, even last year, which was considered to be a little bit of a downtime, we had about globally 1.3 trillion that outflows from sustainable finance at the global level. Now, but when we look at sustainable investments, we actually looked inflows for every quarter throughout 2022. And from the beginning of the year, we had about 50 billion flowing into sustainable investments, with only 2 billion flowing in the non-sustainable investments. So the stickiness is definitely there. China has a big role to play, and institutional money is looking for ways to actually help around the transition. China is not a place that's a newcomer, let's say. I mean, I think it's quite impressive if we look back when China in the 1980s signed the first environmental law. Then in 2015, we had the PBOC, which effectively also assigned and communicated the 14-point principles about how to actually green the Chinese financial system. Then we had the dual carbon commitments for 2030 and 2060 following the Paris Agreement. And more recently, I think quite prominent has been the change in the national constitution to actually include ecological civilization within China. I think these are very telling signs that can also help institutional money with transparency, because that's what we're looking for. And I think that's probably where everyone, including China, I mean, you talked about supply chains, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for responsible supply chains. We want transparency, we want disclosure. We want to understand how companies are planning to move to carbon neutrality or net zero. We can figure out how we want to call that. And then we need those reports so that we can analyze them. There are changes happening. I think even China will start feeling that there's changes in policies and regulation around stewardship and active corporate engagement. So most companies over time, and in particular from 2024, will start filling that. So you will have institutional money asking for that information upfront. There is an element of openness that needs to happen, but I think that's also going to help a little bit with something that's missing around much more guidance around greenwashing. Because yes, people will report, will make claims, but we need to have that regulation. Again, I believe by the end of the year or early next year, we're going to have much more of that. And product labeling, whether that's on financial products or whether that's for consumer products, it doesn't matter. We do know from the European Union, right, already, for example, carbon neutral products are not allowed unless actually the producer can't support that claim. We have the same requirements in financial system, and as institutional investors, we need to be able to support the claims that we have.
I think that's a very good point, and it does seem as this conversation about carbon neutrality has progressed, we've moved just beyond, laying out some of the principles, the pathway, to okay, we need some action. And maybe I can put out ports as an example. I'm wondering, there's been lots of discussion about different ports in China, electrification, automation, and we're sitting near one right here. Anyone have some insight into, how the ports are becoming greener?
I can share. So it's not just in China, actually. So I was just in the U.S. last week in Long Beach, in the port of Long Beach. I think in 2034, 2035, in about 10 years, there will no longer be allowed any such truck with emissions. So it's not just lower emissions you talk about, it's just no emissions.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why we focus on building this truck. Same for China, right? We're working with a number of top logistics companies, and going in and out of ports, you're seeing a lot of investments being made in chargers. And for us, when we work with global brands, so we work with companies like Decathlon, they need to ship stuff from factories in China onto a boat. So that's port number one. Boat goes to the US, gets off the boat, or goes to Europe, gets off the boat in Rotterdam, that's boat trip finishes, and then goes on another truck, right? So port here, port there, both have a lot of traffic going in and out. And ports are the perfect place for recurring trips, so it's fixed routes, and it makes it easy to install fast charging facilities for trucks. And you made a point about, and Evelyn, you as well, about paying for cleaner products. You may not have to. So how many of you guys who are in the audience think it's more expensive to use an electric vehicle than a diesel vehicle? Raise your hand if you think it's more expensive to go clean. You might think it's more expensive.
Yeah.
Sounds like a trick question.
Yeah.
Clearly the answer is no, right. So you got the trick question. We've learned, and we've done with our work, we can achieve parity. And in fact, we offer in many markets a product that's cheaper than a diesel comparative, both in the hardware and also in the maintenance and the operations cost. And that's because China especially has developed so much in the EV supply chain. China makes nearly 80% of the world's batteries. China makes more than 50% of the world's cars. So you talk about supply chain localizing in China. And so coming back to ports in China and also elsewhere in the United States and Europe are the perfect place for using and adopting electric vehicles that could actually be cheaper than using diesel trucks today.
Can I ask you a question about your trucks?
Yes, sir.
So if we look at the circular economy, something which is becoming quite a buzzword around the world,
Yes.
and the EU are even including it in their reporting standards, aren't they?
Yes.
So the sustainable financial reporting will have to, for the first time, include
Disclosure on
circular
elements.
economy from 28, is that right? So circular economy, you want not just emissions now. We want to make sure there's no wastage, because there's a heck of a lot of waste everywhere. So the trucks, are you building completely all new trucks? Everyone is new. Or do you do any remanufacturing, or are you planning to do any remanufacturing where you take some of the millions of trucks and cabs which are already on the roads and convert them from diesel into electrified and autonomous vehicles?
A great point. So what we make sure we do is we focus on two things besides just the truck itself. First is how the electricity is made, right? So we make sure we work with channels like solar power, wind power, nuclear power, and so forth. So it's not just the trucks themselves, but the electricity, the fuel that's being used. We make sure it's as clean as we can possibly make it. The second thing is, you mentioned lifetime or life cycle of the products. At the end of the lifetime of the trucks, we make sure we actually recycle the material from the batteries, right? So whereas it's hard to recycle existing trucks today because their structure is so old and sort of backward, we make sure in the new trucks that we make, nearly 70% reusability is achieved with the battery after its lifetime. And then we find ways to recycle that into a storage unit, which then we can put back to places like warehouses and ports. That can become the supplementary product to make the charging more efficient, but also be connected to the solar grid, right? So you have a full cycle of solar generation of power goes into storage batteries, which are made from recycled car batteries and truck batteries, and then the trucks themselves.
Great. To add, by the way, I think even in China, circular economy principles are still, they have been implemented for quite some time. There is that expectation already. And I think, from an institutional, again, investor point of view, we do look at the circular economy theme as something that cuts across all industries. All industries need to be able, moving forward, to demonstrate the circularity within the business model, whether that's 10, 20, 30%, but also to understand what happens to what's left, the residue. Can it actually being used? Definitely. If not, where does it go? How is that? So I think when we look at cost parity, right, I think we also need to be thinking, and I think it's quite important for early stage startups, right, or people who are starting now, those concepts of life cycle analysis. We need to understand from point A to point B, cradle to cradle, as we call it, what is actually that cost? Beyond just like start production, distribution, everything, right? You need to look at the whole value chain, and you need to understand its cost elements, including any kind of carbon adjustments that you need to have on that.
And are your investors asking for this type of information? Or are you seeing it more as a regulatory demand pushing down?
I think you need to acknowledge, right? The international institutional investors follow their own net zero commitments at their own country. And what I mean by that, banks have signed up to Net Zero Banking Alliance. That's an alliance of about 75 trillion of assets under management. Then the Net Zero Asset Managers, which is the institutional money, have signed to something that's called the Net Zero Asset Manager Alliance. That's another 65 trillion of assets under management. So they themselves have committed that they actually recognize within their fiduciary duty that climate and ESG considerations are starting to become financially material. Therefore, because of that, they need to start understanding the ESG parameters for every company, and that's why they're also recognizing that they need to have what we call the active ownership and the active engagement. So on a yearly basis, they will reach out to a corporate and they will ask them to disclose that information. And if they're not happy with progress, they will actually ask them to make certain changes. There is a carrot and stick approach, right? And also at UBS, we believe in engagement. So you don't move out, you're trying and encourage, educate, help corporates transition. We just need them to accelerate what they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, which is the carrot and the stick, right? I just learned today, actually, before this meeting, one of our customers, so we have, on our advisory board, we have people from, folks from Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Decathlon, and so forth. And one of our customers actually told me today they can raise ESG bonds, ESG debt from their investors if they prove in their reporting and their practice that within their supply chain they're using clean or cleaner trucks for transportation and also the rest of the supply chain. So talk about paying for clean options. There's actually a way to perhaps make more money or raise more money by going the clean route.
It becomes a license to operate at some point, right? Yes, there's much more push on the listed companies. Yeah. That's okay, fine. But you start seeing the Coca-Colas and all this stuff because they have made a certain commitment. Yeah. They will naturally push all the first, second, third tier of suppliers in order to understand the look across in terms of how are they committing. Because it's literally, it becomes as good as your weakest link. Otherwise, you can't just you can't deliver your own commitments unless someone is not delivering.
I think
right.
the challenge there is the transparency throughout the supply chain as you get more levels deep. That's the issue, which I believe can only really be tackled by some sort of certification process or regulatory requirements. Otherwise, so for example, with your truck, if you're trying to look to the raw material supplier of the outer shell, how do you know what they're telling is really true? So it's getting that level of transparency and accuracy. I believe in China, they're probably very well placed here due to the depth of supply chain and how the regulatory environment is, that if they were willing, I think it's something that could be pushed through quite easily and quite strongly.
I think the transparency or the lack thereof has been a big challenge for our customers. So,
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks in the audience come from high-tech backgrounds. Trucking is a low-tech business. So
You're making it high tech.
that's our goal, yeah. So prior to this, if you ask a fleet, all right, so let's say we work with a company called Carry Logistics in Hong Kong, and they report for their listed company in Hong Kong. They need to report their carbon emissions, their fuel consumption. With diesel trucks, they barely knew how many liters of diesel they're burning, because they can't track comfortably and with high speed and transparency exactly what goes on in the traditional diesel trucks. And so by offering them at least a high-tech solution, they can at least start to track their products. Now we need to also go a step further and enforce and ask our suppliers to also show us, the makers of the trucks, what exactly goes in the materials. But I think we're moving at least one step closer to full transparency in the full cycle of supply chain.
I think that's an opportunity, right? I think we should acknowledge that there is an opportunity for economic development. I mean, yes, making trucks was a low-tech. It's become a high-tech.
Yeah.
Well, that requires much more skilled workforce. So there is an opportunity to actually educate, and it's all about education, right? And using AI, maybe using blockchain. I mean, the technology exists in order to help with the transparency and the traceability.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of educating, collecting the data, and disclosing it, right? So that institutional investors like us can actually consume in order to make financial decisions. Easier said than done, right? I appreciate
Much easier said than done.
super difficult.
Yeah, I mean, like, how soon are we going to get to that point, back to ports, for example, or some other industry, AI plus these industries, heavy industry, is that something, okay, we first have the truck, and then we first have this particular piece of software, and then 10 years later we have the whole thing much more transparent, or is it, other metrics that tell us it's going to be faster?
I can tell you a little bit my view, right? I mean, the technology right now is not what the problem is. The problem is, and that's globally, right? I mean, it's policy and commitment from the top. If you stick to a national contribution plan that says, I need to get to net zero by 2050 or carbon neutral by 2060, and top down there is that kind of what we call guidance of decarbonization pathways in a particular sector, and everyone in that sector understands, call it the carbon budget, and how they contribute to that, on how much is allocated to them, then that carrot or stick approach, and you can decide which one you want to use. I mean, the stick is a carbon tax. Top down, you start charging for everything, then that naturally will force corporates to take action. If it costs you a lot, you will actually take action in order not to pollute as much as you did. Now, there is also incentives, and that's what we've always been talking, even within the financial sector, right? We want certain incentives, whether these are, let's say, capital reductions in our particular case, where I can actually enable the transition to companies that are helping, right? I mean, if you're a company that is displacing an old transportation industry, right, with something that by design has lower carbon, I want to also be recognized for me helping support you. So it's all about public-private partnership, but it needs to be driven top-down. Technology, I don't think it's the absence of technology that's stopping people to do that. It's carbon doesn't cost a lot right now, so people can continue polluting.
I would add that, so the top-down approach is the right thing to ask for, but we as businesses, private business, we also need take on the role to start somewhere. So what we do is, talk about ports, we pick specific routes and use cases where we start to deploy with a timeline. So in China, for example, we're doing Shanghai port to our customers' factory warehouse in Shanghai. Then in the Shanghai to Beijing route, starting next year, we're going to actually just use our electric trucks when we start producing next year to electrify that route for brands that are including but not limited to Decathlon. So we have to show to the, in the top-down approach, we have to also provide the bottom-up exemplar where we say, okay, this is a route where we show you dozens of trucks can electrically and cleanly transport the products. Mm-hmm. And then around the ports and in sort of nearby fixed routes, we can also begin to adopt our driverless technology and use that there. Same in the United States, we work with our customers in the state of California. So talk about Long Beach. We go from Long Beach to Bakersfield and Ontario, which are close warehouses within the state. And then we use these trucks as well starting 2025. So I think wherever we go, we have to, the burden's on us, the businesses, the makers of these things, to show one example clearly. We invite people to see it. We invite real businesses, real use cases. And I think that'll hopefully help accelerate the top-down approach as well.
The one thing I would add on the top-down approach is the fear that it may make a lot of SMEs struggle. So a lot of multinationals or companies that can obtain the financing, they have reporting structures, shareholders, boards, they can start doing this thing for the opportunities you spoke about. But if the top-down approach is with a stick, SMEs employ more than anyone else globally. They're responsible for more tax paid than anyone else globally. But individually, a lot of them may not have the education, the technology, the ability to be able to take advantage of the technologies required for them to meet any top-down stick approach. So I think whatever the regulatory changes are, whatever the top-down does, I would just bear in mind that SMEs may need a carrot approach.
I think that's an absolute fair, right? I mean, whenever when we talk about transition and transition finance and moving towards a lower carbon business models, we always also talk about just and equitable transition. It needs to be fair for everyone. We can't, and that's where it gets very difficult, right? Because to your point, on one hand, I need to acknowledge and make sure that nobody misses out, but I need a lot of these things in the road as quickly as possible because I live in a world of a carbon budget. So, and that's where I was saying that there needs to be some kind of public-private partnership, right? Because, yes, even you have all the good intentions, even you yourself, right? You need to find enough capital to scale very quickly, right? And that becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
And that's where public money can come in to help accelerate by supporting SMEs as well. But that needs to be in a way that everyone can participate in that transition and benefit. I mean, IRA in the Inflation Reduction Act, I think it's a really good example of how public markets are actually stepping in order to help develop new technologies and new business models.
On that exciting note, I think we have to call it a day, but it just shows how much energy there is, I think, in this area of ESG and transportation logistics. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
好的，再次感谢。
Thank you very much, Evelyn, and all the panelists. I would like to say this is the end of our day one activities. However, we have one more session to go. At 5 o'clock, we are going to have 2 parallel roundtable discussions. If you are joining CMO now, you can go to level 2. And if you go for Sustainable Development Roundtable, you can also go to Guanghu Hall. And we are going to have a cocktail party at around